Reykjavik is completely exploding.
I can imagine.
The rent is insane, and there's not many new houses. Oh, okay.
The interview is started.
Oh, great.
Yeah, no, this is great. This is an interview. Are we okay for the levels as well with the mics? Do we need to get closer or?
No, you can
Okay.
keep it natural.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, we can just continue with this. It sounds like a very idyllic place. Oh, so you were saying, so housing is going crazy in
Sadly.
Reykjavik.
It's a lot of young kids who are just graduating from school. They're trying to get into the market, and they're just still living with their parents because there's no way for people like our age to be able to buy or like put down the first payment for an apartment. So if you're renting, it's just insane. It's like the prices for that, I don't know how much, like an average price for a downtown apartment, maybe 2,000 euros for like 1 or 2 bedrooms, tiny. So it's a lot.
I know, and I guess gentrification might have to do with that as well.
100%.
Right? Because that kind of, I mean, is it becoming now an issue in Iceland, or maybe it's already an issue? Like after the banking crisis, and Iceland was very dependent on the banking sector, right? And then everything moved to tourism to try and recover from the banking crisis in 2008, 2009.
100%. That's actually why. So my dad had a construction company up in the north, and he had all these like heavy machinery, so he has license for everything. And we went bankrupt, the family. So that's why he bought the land in Hvalfjörður under my mom's name, not under the family name, so that we could slowly build the future outside of Reykjavik. And that's what me and my partner are doing now, because Reykjavik is expanding a lot. There's not much space. So to be able to, have a future in Hvalfjörður, it's only a 45-minute drive if you need to get into the city, to be able to be there and, have a future studio.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'd love to visit when it's ready. You'll have to let me know.
You're all invited.
I was thinking we could go back to some of the things that we were actually talking about earlier today, because I think there were some interesting things to talk about there. Like we were talking, so when you mentioned David Lynch's method, or like routine, and using transcendental meditation to like lower down, say, the ambient noise, like sink down into the sea of yourself. That was the metaphor, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And to like, well, hear more or hear yourself more. And that was actually something I was thinking about your music and about where your music is coming from. And I thought that I found some common grounds that potentially will make interesting topics of conversation, and that's one. I don't know if you feel like this, if you can relate to this in any way, but for me, like, I think there's some kind of honesty that you only feel when you're in that mental state, when you're in the zone, when you're creating, when you're composing, when you're writing, when you're at the piano, and you reach like these depths of yourself, right? The sea bed of yourself. And I'm not talking about something abstract, like the way you feel it. That's what I wanted to ask you, like how you live that, how you feel that. It's like you are, in a way, you're someone different. You speak to yourself with a different voice. The things you say to yourself, the speech of your mind, let's say, changes. You say to yourself different things. You feel different. In my case, I think I feel more honest, like a better person, like with, like less prone to have, say, egotistical thoughts, or less prone to even be harsh on myself as well. It's like a new voice opens in your brain, and you speak to yourself differently. Is that how you feel towards the creative process and when you're composing, when you're at the piano?
I definitely do feel that way. From the very first moment of like writing my first piece, having somehow that gateway of being like completely unaware of space and time and just being sort of hypnotized by, it was a crazy storm outside, and just sort of walking towards the piano. I'd never written anything before. I'd started to like play the piano when I could reach, apparently, up, and I loved that. I was always the most annoying sibling ever. But having sort of that emotion is like just driven by some force. I can't really put it into words, and then being able to have sort of an honest talk with myself and to get out some emotions which I maybe wasn't aware of. So I feel in like the present time that it's sort of this gateway and sort of peeling layers like of an onion of yourself while you're just sitting by the piano, and preferably alone, when there's no disturbance, no nothing, turning off your phone and just being there with yourself and maybe discovering a new part about yourself and new emotions that you weren't aware of. And I feel that is it's like a therapeutic experience. And when you're maybe always open for that. Maybe you're sort of distracted by excuse me, something at work or family life, but when you get those like really special moments with yourself, it's something that's feels magical.
It also helps like touch base or like crystallize what you live through in your everyday, right? Because we go through things, and yesterday with the concerts, it was a bit like that. I think that you live through very intense moments very quickly. It doesn't really stay in you. It doesn't really develop or leave the mark it should be leaving. And then when you have the time to like sit down, process everything, take everything in, kind of like you create scar tissue, kind of, right? Like you process things and then you can incorporate them, and they move to being a part of yourself, the things that you live.
Exactly. It's like a form of acceptance. Maybe something that you were denying about yourself, like just having that complete freedom of expression and accepting some emotions that you maybe weren't ready to accept, and sort of being able to have that complete honesty and self-reflection, that space.
Sorry, but then again, we're talking about, or the way that we're talking about this is in a very like by being very aware of emotions, and clearly by having spent a lot of time thinking about these things. But you were talking about your childhood before, and you started writing at a very early age. And sort of the emotional process when composing was the same, but clearly a child doesn't have these ideas formed already, or is not really considering these topics. But then again, this emotional process was already happening when writing music at that early age. Can you remember how that felt?
So experiencing a trauma at the age of 7, it was just a few months after that trauma when I obviously wasn't aware of how I felt about it. I just remembered feeling very, very dark. And I was a very happy child growing up. So it felt like a complete polar opposite of myself. And I wasn't really aware of what I was experiencing. I just remember feeling extremely devastated, and I wouldn't maybe say depressed, but maybe you could say so. And being able to put something out when I didn't have the emotional maturity to talk about or realize my emotions, just to be able to put something out and to build on that always gave me the space, and putting then my future experiences into music.
Yeah, and sadly, those traumas are necessary, right? Like you said, up to that point, you were just a very happy child, and I think there's always a first tragedy, or first series of tragedies, as it might be for some people, that just necessarily have to like break a hole for the darkness to get in, and then from that darkness and your inner light, your final personality is going to be built. And those are really moments that are configuring who we are going to end up being, what we're forced to go through, and the way that we channel that Happened to me as a
Absolutely.
child as well. I lost a friend at a very early age, and that like opened this door to what death was, and suddenly it became this preoccupation that I incorporated. To this day, I'm completely terrified of death. Like if I let my brain go without controlling it, I'll end up thinking about that. It just captures me every now and then, and I think it was the way that I processed that first death, which you're not really. I mean, adults are around you, but maybe they won't really understand you. Sometimes communication doesn't really work in your environment, and the way that you channel these first dark experiences, just part of life, right? But the way you channel them, then they're gonna end up configuring who you end up being, how optimistic you are, how pessimistic you are,
100%. And
how you
also,
see things like
yeah,
death or so.
yeah, and as you say, by channeling them, such a fortunate thing for us to be able to have that. Whereas you see that a lot of people experience any kind of traumas in their life and they completely put it underneath the rug, the carpet, and something that is just constantly affecting them through life without really ever being able to put a finger on it, and not even wanting to open that closet of emotions. Of actually, as you say, how fortunate, as difficult traumas are in life, is that how that has shaped us and how we are able to work with our emotions and talk about emotions that we go, whatever we're going through within our music, and like we are doing today. I think we're fortunate to have that.
Yeah, and those early years you spent them in a very, very small community, which is also something that definitely must configure the person that you end up turning into or being. I guess if you grew up, I don't have that experience, but I guess if you grew up in a very big place with an insane population, maybe you're more detached from your surroundings. Maybe your closest relationships stick to, say, your family unit. But when you grow up in such a small town, are you like more connected to everyone there? Do you feel more part of a community, that you're codependent, that you're helping each other? Was that your experience growing up?
In Iceland, especially in the smaller parts of like the smaller towns, it's been a lot of hardship throughout the generations. And a big thing in the smaller communities is to actually not talk about your emotions. It's always putting everything behind. So whatever happens, you just don't talk about it. So that is sort of, at least like my grandmother, for example, if you would talk about something challenging with her, she would not acknowledge you as a person. And I've accepted the fact it's okay. But that is sort of how people behave in those smaller communities, is that if you have something challenging that you're dealing with, you're kind of on your own, apart from your family, obviously. So it's not like a network of, helping each other, that sort of community. It is a strong sense of community in the sense of surviving. Because, when you're isolated in the winter and you get like the electricity gets cut off, you rely on on the community to survive. And that is surely a beautiful thing. But going back now, and after having experienced what I experienced, it was only 2 years ago when I was actually able to accept truly what had happened to me. I'd been sort of processing it, and sometimes, we're always going to have the scars throughout our lives. And that was such a beautiful thing to be able to fully acknowledge and accept what happened to me, and to be back in my hometown and not really stressing about that I wasn't able to talk to people about it. I was just accepted it in my heart and with my family. And now going back, I see the beauty for what it is today. I understand the hardships that they have gone through as a community and the town. But I am very glad actually that I moved away, because I moved away at the right time for me and my family. Going into Reykjavik, where there's many more people, and all these opportunities like for education, for music. And my parents have been extremely supportive of, we're not a wealthy family. We come from, hardship and working class. So they worked extra hard to be able to give me opportunities and my siblings to get the education that we wanted. So coming back to the hometown like 2 years ago, it was just such like a feeling of gratitude towards my parents, of seeing the hardship, moving to the capital and being able to return, like, I still have family there, and just seeing it for what it is and seeing that beauty.
Because it does take a certain distance, doesn't it, to be able to appreciate the place where you come from, how much you owe it, how much you owe who you are, where you are, to the people before you, to the people who were there before you, and not even necessarily your family directly, but everyone who's had to work the land, everyone who's had to go through all this hardship, so you can be today where you are. You need to get some perspective, I guess, to kind of get away for a bit, and then come back to it, to see it with fresh eyes, and to realize, right, I'm a very fortunate person, and that's to a great extent because of who came before me and what they did, so I could be here today.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, yeah, there should be a bottle there somewhere. Actually, I was thinking about the same thing that we just mentioned. I think after reading an interview where you were talking about Tephra Horizon and about the lava beds. Is that what you call it? Lava bed? Does that make sense? Like the solidified lava?
The eruptions, the lava pools. Yeah.
And that kind of made you thought about the strata as well, right? And like how that lava will form the new soil for things to grow on. And I thought that's a really good metaphor for what we just described, for how the past is like the lava bed for your plants to grow on, right? And that's why I took maybe your take on that when writing the piece and when reflecting upon that. Maybe your take was different, but it made me think of that, of how the people before you are kind of this lava bed, which brings fertility after this massive destruction, right?
Yeah.
Which you could maybe compare to the hardships of the community. This disruption, and then something fertile can come from that.
Absolutely. And also realizing that an eruption could happen at any time, that, instead of worrying about the future, was just respecting the past and acknowledging the past and trying to live in the present moment as much as possible. For that piece, Tephra Horizon, on the Reykjavik Peninsula, it hadn't been volcanically active for 800 years. And it was the first eruption when I was filming the music video for my first album, Belur. I was able to fly over the first eruption in 800 years on a helicopter. It was like the most surreal experiencing, and actually my partner was directing and falling in love sort of in the helicopter at the same time. It was like a mind-blowing experience. So, and that was like a beautiful eruption. It was like a friendly touristic eruption. And that was the beginning of this new phase. And now we've had, 5 eruptions since, and some of them have been actually not very friendly and quite destructive. We had to evacuate the town of Grindavik, which is in the south from Keflavik. It's been quite a scary thought, actually, because I was filming the music video there, and like a few months later you had an eruption, so that area there it's
gone.
It's just different, but feeling sort of inspiration from just the forces of nature. And there's a big thing in Iceland, is that you respect the country so much, is that anything can happen. Like, you can have any weather condition and an earthquake or an avalanche. So being able to understand and respect the nature is something that is deeply rooted in us, and to be able to sort of have the respect of like a little pause of Mother Earth, just creating new land, being able to film and sort of create around the idea of eruptions. It felt really inspiring. But now it's sort of yeah, a bit devastating for the people of Grindavik.
Yeah.
And also now it could be an eruption like in Blaufjöll, which is very close to Reykjavik. And some parts of Reykjavik, like suburban areas, could go under. Like nobody knows. It's just this new period of, it could be for the next hundreds of years, like eruptions every year. So we don't know that.
And it must make you feel so small and so fragile, because after 800s of, say generations and generations that knew nothing like this. And then suddenly it's been, 4 or 5 times already since?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, you definitely feel very small.
You feel safe for 800 years and then no, you're not safe. It must make you, it must really, I guess, condition the way you go over your life as well, because you have to be prepared for anything could happen, really. And obviously anything can happen to any of us.
Yeah.
But for, say, Mother Earth to be sending this message across the whole nation, it must really mark like who you are as a community, how you go through your life.
Yeah, it really does. But I think the beauty of and the strength of Icelanders is that anything can happen. Like we could have a really destructive eruption in the middle of Vatnajökull. It's like one of the most powerful stations. But we never know. And why spend your life worrying about what could happen instead of just enjoying the moment? So it's it's a phrase in Iceland called "Þetta reddast," which means, it's going to work out some way. And it goes with everything. It's like, we're recording an album or putting together a music video or just going on a hike and something goes wrong. It's like, þetta reddast, it will be fine. That's the mentality of the people, which is really, it's like, you're not going to know about the future. You can just, take it as it comes.
It's really the best possible attitude towards this uncertainty.
Yeah.
Right? Because you could either become obsessed about trying to control these variables that really are completely out of your reach, or you can just embrace the uncertainty, embrace the mistake, embrace whatever comes and try to do your best with what you're given at a certain time.
Yeah.
That said, though, does it ever get a bit boring to be constantly talking about Iceland for an Icelandic artist?
I wouldn't say so, because I understand how exciting it must be for others to, it's a really magical place. And for me, it's a really magical place going up there and having that as my home country. So I'm very proud to be an Icelander. So I understand the excitement and the enthusiasm. And of course, relating to what I do, I think is an important part of it. So no, I wouldn't say that I would ever feel, tired about it. I would actually say sometimes I get questions, it's like, do Icelanders live in like ice caves? Is that true? I've heard that question in America so many times. Like I was on tour. I was like, yes, we live in ice caves. Yes, we're very...
We ride penguins.
Exactly. Like very funny, obscure questions. So that sort of gives it a fresh... But like hearing that question so many times, I was like, oh gosh. And then there's that question, isn't it true that the Vikings, they were trying to go... Like they went to Iceland and they named Iceland and Greenland. So all the people would go away from Iceland because it's green, but Iceland is green.
That's like widespread thought as well.
Yeah, but it's like a myth. And then the third question is it true that Icelanders have this dating app to tell you if you're related to someone or not?
Oh, I've heard that one.
Everybody's heard that. It was like, no, we don't have that app. But we're able to look up, which I actually find really interesting, is that it's called the National Registration.is. And you can look up any name and you can see how related you are to the person.
Because there was this massive DNA study performed in Iceland, wasn't there?
Yeah, and just because of our last names. So I'm able to trace back my family in Iceland and Norway until like the 1500s at least. So you can go back and like look at this incredible database of like your family and how your family's moved around the country. And so I feel like that's actually really fascinating. So people...
Of course.
It just became a joke because people were like, you're dating a person who are you related in the fourth So that became like a thing abroad for people to make fun, make fun of. But I actually think that database is really interesting because you can trace
It's
the
privilege.
movement. Yeah.
But I guess because you talk about, you understand the curiosity because it is after all a magical place. But when one is born into that though, do you have that perspective of like, I live in a magical place? Because that's your ordinary place, that's your place of origin. Can you see it as something extraordinary?
I think I fully grasped that is that so I moved away in 2013. I moved to London and I was working abroad for 7 years, and I just came back for the holidays. And I think I didn't really fully understand how fortunate we are to have to live in such a magical place until I moved back to Iceland after the pandemic started. I think you needed to sort of have that perspective to move away from the island and to come back and actually see things differently. So I never really wanted to move back to Iceland because it's a small community, and I was living in New York, just a complete opposite of Reykjavik. But actually being sort of forced because of the pandemic to move back to my home country, it was the best decision ever. How things actually, things happen for a reason sometimes. And it really was like that for me. And I was just slowly realizing I was going through a really difficult breakup after New York. And just by the day I was this is where I'm meant to be. This feels properly like home again. But I think I needed that distance and that perspective. So a lot of people, in the smaller towns around Iceland, they've never been abroad. So they maybe don't have that perspective. They just see the day-to-day life, that survival mode, that hardship.
Yeah.
So I always encourage the younger generation especially to sort of, if you have the chance to go and study even just 1 year abroad, to take that chance. And then if you want to move back, at least you can always try it out. Doesn't hurt to try.
Because it's such a blessing, isn't it, to get the perspective with which you can then go back and really see with new eyes and appreciate with new eyes the place where you were born and the people who live there and your history. Such a blessing. I felt it that way too, to the point that I kind of found a new love for my hometown. I'm from a small hometown myself, so from a small village myself. And then coming back to that, and I could see people's lives through new eyes. And I became kind of very dear of everyone there.
That's beautiful. You moved away from Spain, or?
Well, I went to study at uni in Granada, which was the closest city. And then from there I lived a year in Dublin.
You lived in Ireland. That's nice.
Yeah.
Dublin is
it's
great.
my second country. I love it so much. I have really good friends there. I really, really like it in there. And then I moved here to Barcelona. And I've been here for more than 10 years now. So that I really stopped living there when I was 18, which must have been kind of the same for you too, right?
Yeah.
So it's when you actually become a full grown-up, is away from your hometown and then you come back. It's sometimes I think of the different stages of life, like different populations. So you're a child and you live in a small village. And then you move to a small city when you're a teenager. Then to become an adult, you move to a really big capital. And then you realize this is too much, this is too loud, there's too many people, I need to go back. And then you go back with this whole experience, and there's a sense of completion when you go back to your hometown with this new perspective.
Yeah, it's like a full circle. But again, things happen for a reason. Imagine if you wouldn't have left, how I always think about that, how you'd be today. So there's a phrase that the phrase carpe diem, which my mom told me. So when I was about to move abroad, my dad he's very how do you say, financially, he wants to make sure that you're financially stable. It's very solid like that, and wants you to be fine and get a good education and everything. And I was I got my grade A levels on piano, and he'd always loved the music, of course. But it was music. So what can you do? Like, are you gonna travel the world, or like, how are you gonna make money? Basically, how are you gonna be stable later on? And then when I got the opportunity to work as a model out of all professions in London, my dad was like, shook his head. Is that a really good industry, Eydís? Like, are you gonna be fine? Are you gonna, is it like good money and stuff? I was like, oh, Dad. And I was thinking about it. I was like, maybe it's not the best decision for me. And my mom was like, when are you gonna, you as a little kid from Blönduós, to get an opportunity like that, carpe diem, to go.
So it's the two polar opposites.
But both like absolutely coming from a loving place.
Of course.
Right? It was just that's important. Just wanted to make sure that I was fine. And then now afterwards, my mom and dad came to a performance I had in London, and just to see, the pride and after all they've done for me. So it's just sometimes think, what if you hadn't made that decision? If you wouldn't just jumped on things, how would you be today? But that's a parallel.
It's a dangerous game, that one, though, right?
Yeah.
The if game.
Yeah, no, I'm not like dwelling on it at all. But sometimes the mind wanders. It's like, how would things be? But I'm so grateful because you go with your gut always, and if you face a crossroad, you have your trusted allies. Like in that case, my mom being like, "Oh, just go on." And a week later, I was living in London. It was a really So our gut feeling, and sometimes to take a difficult decision with our lives is sometimes the best ones.
But I get the impression that you were very mature emotionally, and in the way that you went through your decision making, through your decisions that really just determine what your life is going to be. Like, it sounds like you were very thoughtful and very mindful of all these decisions from a very early stage. It's like from the way that you started to process things emotionally when you were a kid to when you decided A, to start modeling, and B, to stop doing it. From the outside, I don't really know much about the modeling world or anything, but it sounds to me like it was very early on when you were able to decide, I'm going to do this, and when you were able to decide, I'm going to stop doing this, I don't belong in this world. I'm not sure if that was your exact thought, but like it was quite early on, right? That you decided, no, I'm going to stop this and I'm going to go back to music. Like, it sounds like you were a very mature person, very capable of making determined decisions about your future and about your life from a very early stage. And I think that's one of the best possible qualities that you can have to ensure that you're going to have a happy future, which is all that we're looking for in the end, right?
Yeah. I think I would say that I had such a trusted network around me, like my parents and my siblings, of helping me to guide me throughout these difficult decisions. Like, for example, when I got my grade A levels at the age of 18, and my dream was to go to Vienna to get my bachelor's degree and then later the master's. It was just a determined goal that I had for myself. And I was at the Mozarteum. I had like a summer masterclass there. I had a bit of a challenging experience with my professor, who actually offered me a scholarship, not because of my talent, but because he had was infatuated by me, offered me a scholarship in America. And that made me completely go away from music, basically. Because I was thinking, like, why am I getting an opportunity for something that I've dreamt of because of an emotion versus my talent? And I just felt completely like
casted a dark shadow on your relationship with music.
100%. And that's why I stepped away from music. And that's why I went into the modeling world. I was just before I got that opportunity, I was just going to go and teach piano in Iceland and do something with music, but I didn't really know what. And so I needed that sort of escape from music and travel the world and be by myself and slowly find my love towards the instrument again. So when, being by yourself in a new country and not knowing anybody, at least I always had the piano. And that's how I needed to fall back in love with it. And then in 2017, just felt ready at last to sort of like, how am I going to go into doing music again? Like, I know that I love to compose, but what can I do with it? I didn't really know that I could have this as a career. And that's when I started to discuss with my manager, Nick, and he gave me the guidelines that guided me to where I am today and helped me along the way. So I think it's also important, like, I don't know, at least for myself, to sort of get that distance away from music instead of just going into and getting a degree for maybe somebody else than myself, because I was not in the same place of mind with classical music, at least. So I'm also grateful for that I sort of had that experience and got away from music and then fell in love, just found a different approach to it. So it's also, tough experiences guide you as well into the right direction.
And again, in a way, it's again the gained perspective of just getting distance from something to see it under new eyes. We're kind of back there, right? So it's not, I guess, yes, you make decisions for a very mature position, but you also listen a lot to the voices around you who point in different directions, and you kind of like guess the average of all those opinions, or follow a hunch that one of those voices feels more right or more in the right.
Yeah.
And so the people around you is like what they think, what they hope for you, is that's very important for you as well.
Definitely, it was sort of just this, goodness. I wouldn't be the same person I am today without my family. I'm so grateful for them. Like, they all have, of course, different opinions, and, you can always, hear their opinion, and you don't have to make a decision about it. It's, of course, in the end about your gut. But having those opinions is very valuable, is that you can, a trusted opinion, is instead of just, people can have any opinion of you, and it's up to you if you take it in or not. But to have such, it's genuine, care for you and for your well-being, to be able to have that is just, wouldn't be here without them.
That's a very nice thing to say. And I'm sure, because sometimes maybe we feel like we don't acknowledge this enough. There are some things that are hard to say. And that's at least my experience, but judging from what you said about the way communication happens in Iceland, perhaps outside of your own household, there's some things that are very hard to say, but are so necessary. Like how, for some of us, it takes so long to just even be able to say I love you to your mom and dad or your sister, and when you're able finally to do that, you think, oh God, I've wasted so much time not saying any of this. But in a way, this acknowledgement also like speaks without words, doesn't it? And I think probably the strongest, most important value that family has is that the unspoken. It's how you understand each other, even if you've taken different paths in life, but because the core is the same. And if it develops in different ways, you know the roots because the roots are common, and that there's no need to say certain things, and they're just spoken without words.
It just is, the unspoken love. I feel like, as you were saying earlier about, how your parents wanted to be here and, being away from Barcelona. But still, at least from what I could hear, is that I could feel how much they are proud of you and, are supportive of your journey and see your value in this journey of yours. And that's such a, you just don't have to say that. It just is. And it's like something in the air, and that's such a beautiful thing to have.
It's really beautiful. I think it's even more beautiful when the people that love you obviously hope the best for you, but they also get excited without really knowing what's going on. Like, they don't really know maybe the process, what you're doing on your hour to hour of every day. But still, they're very fond of what you're doing, and they're very supportive. And it's like, because sometimes to be able to really appreciate something, you have to understand it to a certain degree. And then the people that love you, even without really maybe understanding what you're doing, what it entails that you're doing, they're really like there for you. They're very supportive. Then you can always rely on them. I think that there's a very selfless thing in the way that you support and appreciate others without really knowing what they're up to.
Absolutely, because you have that understanding, and it's like it's in the air, and they see how you're glowing just talking about some parts of what you love to do, and without them maybe understanding it, it's just that they feel it's in the air. It's just again this unspoken love and excitement, as you say, a selfless act of genuinely being there for a friend. That's just stick on to those friends there.
Do you try to be that person for other people as well?
Absolutely, as much as I can. Sometimes I have a thing of I really care so much for people around me, and I want everybody to feel happy. Sometimes I go a little bit above and beyond, above my line, my boundary, and it's sort of something that I'm learning recently. I think it's a really also a healthy learning experience is. When you give so much of yourself to others and you want to help, what is left in the end of the day for you? And sometimes I felt depleted with my own energy and just not really not giving enough for myself as well, because it always has to start here. And then, as my mom said, a beautiful metaphor is that if you're in an airplane and the air pressure drops, you should always put on the mask on yourself first before assisting others. Because you can't help another person if you're going to, what do you say, faint. Yeah, so I always think about that metaphor, is that like in the recent years learning is that, yes, I want to be there for my friends and my acquaintances and other people that that I know around me, but also learning to listen more to myself. Is that, am I available today emotionally for others, or do I need to care about myself today? So sort of like more listening and learning throughout that experience. I think it's
It's one of the most important lessons for an empathic person, right? And I might be guessing too much, but from the time we met yesterday, I got the feeling that you were a very empathic person, and that was actually from the first time we crossed eyes. I saw that you have a very special way of looking other people, because most of us try to, like, we can fixate our eyes on someone else's eyes, but if we start to like think about what we're going to say, like I'm doing just now, or if we feel an inch uncomfortable, our eyes will go somewhere else, then come back. Sometimes we force them back, but you are able to just keep your eyes fixated on the other person, and I think that comes from a very empathic place. And I'm completely guessing here.
You're right.
Because I don't know you very well yet, but it feels to me like that's a very humble thing to do. Like, you need to really give yourself to other people to be able to always look at them right in the eyes, because you're not thinking about yourself at all. You're only thinking about them, because if you think about yourself, you'll have things like doubt and awkwardness, and that will make you steer away your view.
Or ego.
Exactly. But if there's no ego, you can really just give your way through your eyes. You can give your way to someone else. And it struck me like that, like you're a very empathic person. Because of that, I got it from there. And I think the hardest lesson to learn probably for an empathic person is that first you need to look after yourself, because then you might be even hurtful for others in the way that you're trying to help if you're not in a good place yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And I completely agree. And also just for yourself as a, like for example, I think I learned most of it is after performances. I went on my first tour last summer in Europe and North America. And I always said after a show, if people want to come and say hello, and I had a little bit of merch if they want to just meet up after the show. And I always did so because, of course, I wanted to meet the people who were coming to see me perform. And, with the adrenaline after the show, just, feeling just this rise of emotions and energy. And also maybe because of being that way with people, sometimes not realizing that you also need maybe to take care of yourself. Like if you're maybe traveling tomorrow to another show, and I would just feel completely depleted. As much as I enjoyed the performance and meeting everyone, It was just my emotions were like just physically drained in a way. And I remember thinking, was like, okay, maybe I need to actually take better care of my space maybe after a show. Maybe it's better if I am able to just go home and watch a movie and order a pizza or something and just completely like be in a cocoon. So that's also a really healthy learning experience through my empathy. Is as you say, it's unhealthy if we're not in a good place, like constantly trying to help others when we're not in a good place. And maybe the advice, it's maybe not always fitting or even helpful, as you say. So it's a really important balance, excuse me, to have.
And it's hard to learn that, because when you're an empathic person, you kind of think that, oh, I need to help that person because no one else can, the way I can help that person. You know, which is weird, because it almost sounds like, from the outside, it sounds like an egotistical thought to think that you're a superhero. But just like, you can't, like, you're so driven by how someone else might need you that you'll never think that you wouldn't be able to help if you're not okay. You just need to help by default, regardless of your state.
Absolutely. Just having, as I can sense from you as well, having such a good heart, just constantly wanting others to, even just feel slightly better. And then realizing maybe sometimes people do have to go through, as you're saying, it's not always helpful for people to go through certain experiences, not by themselves, as we're always going to be there to support. But sometimes people need to realize, we can tell a person something, but they need to realize and make that decision for themselves. And maybe that's sometimes better to have that space to do so, and maybe to ask certain questions without giving away your energy of just wanting to, nurture that person. Maybe ask, and that's something I learned as well, to maybe ask questions that makes them wonder, how can I, to realize certain things. It's actually something that I learned through going through therapy, which has been really helpful for me, is hearing questions without the person telling me what I, need to improve about myself. Is for me to realize myself with being asked certain questions. And that's a tool that I hope I can help others with, with that.
It's really a beautiful and rewarding thing when something like that happens, isn't it? Like when you hear someone talking about their problems, and you just like kind of open a new door for them, and you see them see the new light that has opened, and they go through it, and they come somewhere, and you see that they really took something from this conversation, and it's one of the most warming feelings, I think, when you can, like, when you realize that your conversation mattered to someone. It was more than an entertainment, but it actually, you managed to maybe hopefully change something for the better.
Absolutely. And that beauty of for a person to realize just that selfless act of being there for a person, and to see, how maybe they want to improve their lives and to go through an experience, but they have to do that in first for themselves, and then, but aid it with another person. It's, yeah.
And do you ever realize that you do that with your music for many people without ever knowing them?
I've read a few comments, and I get a very, very heartful messages on social media, which I try to respond to all of them. Is that, people, especially after COVID, did a KXP session.
Yeah.
And a lot of people lost a relative, and were going through any sort of illnesses. And really, sometimes it was like, it brought me to tears to be able to help a person without ever having met them, not sharing the same space or the energy. And that's something that is incredibly valuable. So, and also after the shows, even as depleted as I felt emotionally, still to be able to hear the stories from people also in real life, and just that honesty is something I can't put into words, and something that just gives me a lot, really, to be be able to do that for other people.
So is then music composition and music performance, is it a calling for an empathic person, a catalyst, a way of helping many? It's like a superpower that will allow me to help way beyond my community.
I feel like, first and foremost, it was a way, like this therapeutic way for myself to deal with my own emotions. And when I was trying to, I was asked to like describe every piece and like what's the emotion and what's the driving force behind it, I always wanted for people to find their own meaning for themselves throughout the music. So I have my own meaning, but another person might have their interpretation of it. So just getting these first messages, that was never like something I thought of to be able to do, and that was never the driving force. But still to the day, I am, like we all go through things, we all go through challenging times, and I'm still developing, so still writing music for myself and what I experience, and always want for people to have their own meaning, and hopefully they can find some light in that.
And what are you expecting in the near future? Where are things going to go?
Nobody knows, huh? Nobody knows. But if I could, I try to visualize things. If I, like for example, to have a studio in Hvalfjörður, that's just something I am going to do. As many years it's going to take, I will do it. So my dream is to start writing for films, to do soundtracks and scores. So that is sort of a vision that I have now. Working on a new album, gonna go on future tours, so that's exciting. But I'm just in the midst of sort of processing the whole core of this new album, adding a little bit of a new dimension to it, which I'm very excited to share. So I'll send you some demos.
Oh, yes, please. We're excited for that.
So, but yeah, hopefully scoring is something, like I'm so inspired by Jóhann Jóhannsson and Hildur Gunnadóttir. Like there's some essence of Jói's emotions where you can just hear, like in your bones, just the hardships he's gone through, and you know, his life and his rest in power. And it's just such an inspiration to sort of connect that element with a visual element. So I'd really would love to do that at some point, so hopefully soon.
You know, my friend who you met yesterday and I went to Johann's concert here. I think it was like 3 or 4 days before we lost him.
Really?
And like the perspective that casted on us was outwardly. It was like how we lived through that as a really beautiful thing, and then like what happens there? Like, and it made me think a lot about how you really don't know what people are going through. You have no idea. You just listen to Johann and you think, oh, he must be such a special person, with such an emotional depth, so sensitive. But then you don't know about anything else that he's going through
Absolutely
someone.
not. It was such a devastating thing. And goodness, I mean, all the work he produced, and to sort of have Hildur, so she was assisting and performing on all of his scores. But the sort of empowering thing that Hildur was, you know, to be such a close collaborator, to be able to sort of continue with the torch. And I feel like a lot of people definitely were heartbroken and devastated after that. But to sort of see and respect his life and his experiences, as you say, like we never know what people are going through. People may have a front and be smiling, you know, throughout the day. And there's also another learning experience, is that to sort of respect everyone for what they are, because we never know. People may never tell us what they're going through. But definitely an inspiration for like all the music he produced. His sound world, just like Sicario, is like, oh my God. So that
Such
is
inspiration for all of us.
Yeah. Goodness. What about you?
What about me?
Yeah. What is your vision? Like, where do you
Of
see
the
it?
future?
Yeah.
I have no idea. I have no idea. I'll be very honest with you. For the past few weeks, I thought yesterday, maybe that concert is going to be the last. I'm too tired.
Oh no,
It's
I'll
been
give you
such a
a
long
hug.
time.
Oh, you're
It's been
exhausted.
such a long time. I'm really trying hard, you know. Then maybe I want to explore poetry more. I don't know. So I really, at this stage, I have no idea what's going to happen. I don't think I can do it though. Like I've always written music because I needed, like you, because I needed it to process things. So I think I'll continue to do it. I know what's going to happen to it. But I mean, you can never escape the creative side of you, can you?
No,
It's like, it just guides your life.
absolutely.
So hopefully we'll stay on that path, and hopefully we can keep crossing our paths in the creative life, and more things will come.
Yeah. Well, we'll see at Opia.
Yeah,
I hope to
We're
hear
gonna
your
see each
poetry
other
then.
in
Are you
a
going to read
few
it in
months.
English? Or is it in Spanish?
I guess so, because if not, who's going to understand?
I feel like it's
Yeah.
such a challenging thing to translate poetry. It's always...
I mean, Rachel, my partner, helped me a lot in
Okay.
this. She's a translator. She's also a poet.
Oh, she is?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah. And her poetry is amazing. And I think I did a first draft of the translation, and then she helped me a lot. Because what I write, for some reason, feels like very Spanish, and more even so, very Andalusian. So I thought, like, how is this going to translate at all into English? But she helped me a lot, and yeah, I'll be happy to share poetry with you if you want to read that. And I would love to read what you write. I know that maybe you haven't. Have you ever published something yet? Is that something that you would be looking into exploring, perhaps in the future?
Yeah, I would definitely love that. I think a poetry book, maybe in Icelandic, but as you know, it's really hard to translate. I need to find like that sort of connection as you have for translation. But there's something like my dad. He, being the carpenter that he is, he used to work like on really heavy situation, like up in the north of Norway, in like the middle of nowhere, like no running water or stuff like that. So he would always write this. It's called fersketla in Icelandic. So the first and the third line rhyme together, and the second and the fourth. And the first two letters of the first line have to have the same letter, capital letter, small letter, and then the second line has to have the same letter. So it's called stuðlar and höfuðstafir. So the first two lines have to have three of the same letters, and the third and the fourth, and then the rhyme of the first and the third, second and the fourth.
Oh, it's such
So
an
it's called-
intricate form.
It's a beautiful form of poetry, and I love fersketlu form. And so my dad writes fersketlir, but he used to do it as like a joking thing to, make the day shorter for his friends. So a friend would pour coffee and would spill it all over the place. He would write a fersketla about that. And at the end of the day, he would read it to him, and everybody would be laughing. So my dad was a big fan of poetry, and had all these poetry books at home. And I just recently started to write fersketler about him. Like we're working in the cabin, and he's doing something and misses a nail or something. I'm like, Þorvaldur, hann kann sitt fag, da 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 da. And I would read it to him, and he's like, laughing, So I don't know. I love a really free form of poetry, but I think working with a fersketler form is something I really want to try to explore a bit more.
Oh, I would love to read some of that. I would love it. I mean, I would need a translation, obviously, but I would love it. What does your dad say about that? Has he read them?
About the ones that I written?
That you brought about him?
Oh, yeah, he loves it. He's sometimes gives me a bad eye, but because I'm making fun of him. But of course, it's all a loving thing. He just loves that I'm writing poetry. My brother, who is actually very funny, he's a musician as well. He's in a completely different field. He's in the black metal scene.
Wow.
And in the best black metal band in Iceland called Mistyrming. Torture, it's called. Some very different fields of music. And he tours all headlines, all the main black metal festivals across the world.
Wow.
It's really great. But his poetry, like they obviously have this like throat screaming thing, so you can never really hear. But they write everything in Icelandic. And if you take away the music, so like one of his birthdays, I asked him if I could read his work in front of everybody in the birthday party without any music. And he had a realization, like I was reading it, and it's incredible Icelandic, like really sophisticated work with words, and it's not a given thing. So his poetry is amazing. And he just started writing again after I read it. And he was like, after you read that, read my work, actually I've been sort of interested in writing more. So it's sort of in the family, like how, but definitely inspired by Iceland, the textures and goodness. So I would love to share like his work and, maybe some of my work with you at some point.
Oh yeah, I would love that. And at that moment then for your brother, you were that person that we were talking about before who is trying to help others the way that other people's opinions have helped you in pinnacle moments of your life. That's very nice. Yeah,
we have a very, very close relationship.
Well, I guess we can leave the interview here. I don't want to tire you anymore. I mean, I would.
Not at all.
I've loved this conversation
Me
so
too.
much. It's been very honest. It's been very direct and very enlightening. And I could stay here with you for hours.
Same here. It's likewise such an honor and a pleasure.
I know, it's been an honor and a pleasure and a privilege for me too. And thank you for playing yesterday at the Sordina sessions. It was, for me, it was endearing to have you there for the first session. And I would love to have you there again and to share a story with you again. It was very heartwarming. And I was saying to you that yesterday, and I will say it now as well, to see the audience, how moved they were during your performance, how inwardly taken they were by your work. It was very moving. It was very moving, and I'm very thankful that I was there to experience that.
I'm so grateful to be a part of it. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a ti. Too many more to come. Too many good things to come, and hopefully we can share some of those things in the future.
I hope so too.
Thank you, Eydís.
Thank you.
We decided to expand a bit on the conversation so that we could talk a bit about the Louis Barsyndrome, which is a very rare condition, a very rare genetic condition, isn't it? That affects the nervous system. And I wanted to give you a space to talk about that and maybe share your knowledge of that with other people that might not know about the disease, because it's really hard to give the visibility that they need to some of the rarest diseases, right? And we need visibility because then we can get funds, we can get the focus, and we can hopefully help with that attention, help to some research be developed on the issue, and maybe hopefully improve the situation for people and families who are going through a situation like that, right?
Absolutely. I think there's one out of all the kids in Iceland. I think it's one out of, if I remember correctly, I need to double check my facts. I think it's 1 out of 100,000 that gets diagnosed with Louis Barsyndrome. And there's one kid in Iceland. So my nephew Mikael, he lives in Denmark. There's one kid in Iceland who has the same disease. And there's different stages of the disease, and it's sort of from a very early age. It looks like the kid is maybe drunk, if you could say, a little unstable, but it doesn't look like anything serious at all. So from the age of 1 until when Mikael started walking, it was always his what do you call it? His system, what do you call it?
The motor system?
Yeah, the motor system just wasn't really, it was a bit behind. So they kept on doing all of these research and tests. and they were in Denmark. So he was born there. And it wasn't until the age of 3 when they did the DNA test and they found out that he had this disease, genetical disease. And he had, at the time, the worst condition of this disease as possible. So it's sort of the average age of, you'd maybe get into a wheelchair at the age of, 15 or 20. And then you're bound to a wheelchair because it's sort of, your body is just degenerating constantly, like your neurological system. You lose your ability to move and to eat and to express yourself, your eyes, you lose visibility. And then eventually, your body shuts down, basically. And when Mikael was diagnosed, we found out that he has the worst possible stage of that, and he was put into a wheelchair, an assisted wheelchair, just a few years later. And it was a very, very hard for the family to process that. But we didn't really know what was happening because he was still he's literally the happiest kid I know. Like always a smile on his face, and his father, my brother, he's the best father in this position. Like he's a pilot and flies to Greenland every 2 weeks. And so him and the mother, they split up after Mikael was diagnosed. And he brings such a light to Mikael's face because he doesn't make my brother's so selfless. He doesn't think about the future, what could happen. He's only about making his kids happy, no matter what. Like even if he's exhausted, hasn't slept for days, or like, just came home from a flight. It's all about like giving them the best food possible and to make his life as good. So it's like it just brings a tear to my eye to think about it. So he couldn't have better parents, and the family were so supportive of Mikael. There being such few people around the world that have this disease. It's a really small network. It's the Louis Barsyndrome Association, which we are donating to. We do run in like the Reykjavik Marathon, for example. Me and my sister, we have been running a lot to raise funds. Last September, I put together a fundraising concert with my sister, with wonderful Icelandic artists, and we raised 1.5 million Icelandic, which is like 12,000 euros.
Wow,
from that
really
concert,
good.
just for him to be able to maybe hopefully go to Spain one day because he loves the sunshine. But he's not able to travel. Like he only loves Lego, ice cream, and the sunshine. So that's like where the money is going to. So last May, actually the day before I released my second album, and I was about to go to the dinner to celebrate the release of my album, he'd all of a sudden like complete paralysis on his right side of his body. And then he started to get a little bit of paralysis on the other side, and we didn't know what it was. So the main death cause of Louis Barsyndrome disease is either leukemia or another form of, can't remember the English word for it, but it's another type of cancer. And so basically as your body is shutting down, like your body is not able to process, so it starts attacking itself basically. So he's like 20 kilos, and he's 12 years old, and he's just losing so much weight. He's on the 3rd phase of his cancer treatment, lost nearly all hair, and he's really upset that because the worst thing about this disease is that the patient is 100% up here. It's just that your body is shutting down. So he knows exactly what's going on, and he gets frustrated with himself because he can't express himself. He can't do the things he loves. And it's really hard. The worst thing is to see him unhappy. Is that, sometimes saying even hating his life and wanting to die, basically, because he is 100% there and sees us crying because, he's having a bad day, and then he feels even worse but he should be able to feel, whatever way he's feeling. So, yeah, when he got diagnosed, it was really, really challenging because we just knew that this could be the end of it, end of his life. But we're not trying to think about that. He's, in the third phase, and he might finish his last part of his chemo in June. So fingers crossed that his body's gonna handle, really intense chemo. Goodness, it's really tough on the body. Vomiting a lot, and he's not great. So fingers crossed that his body's gonna handle that. And we've been visiting almost every month, us from Iceland, and just hoping for the best. And we just continue to raise funds for him, raise funds for this foundation, the Louis Barsyndrome Association, and there's a website for it if people want to check it out.
Yeah, I was about to ask you if people want to help, how can they donate? How can they contribute?
We have an account. It's like the fundraising account of Mikael. It's just a specific bank account for Mikael. But I also just want to, if people want to support the foundation, I think that's also really important into research and to sort of help with, general first steps of being diagnosed with this.
And could you have any advice for people who have just found this condition on their children? Are there support groups that you learned about during the way? What's the first point of contact? What could you advise?
There's most of the information is via this association, Louis Barsyndrome. There's multiple websites, a lot of articles recently, but that's because of the awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And to not lose hope. There is hope in the world, and that we have to stand together as a family and just make each day count, because we never know what's going to happen.
Thank you very much, Eydís, for sharing this.
Thanks.
Hopefully we can help people through Mikael's story and through the association, and maybe bring a bit more light to this. And I really, really hope the very best for Mikael and for the end of the treatment, and really hope it goes in the best way possible.